People who never served in the military, but did serve me a burger, and gentlemen. Welcome to the goldenshellback1 refutation station, and I'll have all the relevant links under the video. Actually, just one, because I put him in Kook Central, so you can see all the info there, and I'll have all the links there. I tried to get Golden Smell into a debate. He usually uses, this guy will use a lot of generalized appeals. He doesn't get into specifics, so I found it really difficult to actually get him to comment on something specifically. The two items we'll go over here for now are his contention that Iowa is a red state, which is subsidized by blue Democrat states, and that's why states like California are in such a budget mess. I referenced to him an article I did, another idiot I put in Kook Central named Farganankle, that legally retarded individual, and where I compared Texas versus California. They have similar demographics, similar location, etc., and Texas was doing so much better. Well, Golden Smell was angry at that, so he decided to pull the candidate out. It's subsidized by the blue states. First of all, I need to mention, back in 1980, the 1980 election, NBC was designated the states that Reagan won as blue states, and Carter's states were red. Even Time magazine, as early as the mid-1990s, was still using that designation, where Republicans were blue, and the socialist communist parties like Democrats were designated red. So he's even got his history wrong there. So let's, and I'll even include a screenshot of where I think he's parroting this from. He was parroting this from another YouTube user named Shirley. First, it must be mentioned, let's go over it. Does Iowa qualify as a so-called red state? He calls them Republicans, and I'll use his incorrect designation just to avoid confusion. He says Iowa is a red state. Before Terry Branstad assumed the office of governor in January 2011, the past 12 years, Iowa voters had put a Democrat in the governor's mansion. Democrats had full control of the legislature from January 2007 to 2011. Right now, the Iowa Senate is controlled by Democrats, and the GOP has the Iowa House. Since the 1988 presidential election onward, Iowa has given its electoral votes to the GOP nominee only once, in 2004. So his argument is looking pretty bad right there. I'll also include a link to where I slapped down a moron named McCain is through on that issue, where she was making fun of Sheldon, Iowa, and I said, well, you're making fun of Democrats. I'll also include screenshots there of who controls state legislatures across the country after the 2010 midterms. The GOP did really well on that. I also have links to results after the 2008 election, and other links that go all the way back to 1990, so you can see who controlled what state legislature and by what kind of margin. So to call Iowa a red state, Iowa has one Republican Senator, Grassley, and one Democrat Senator, Harkin. Grassley is certainly more big government than Harkin is small government. Obviously, if anyone wants to take me on that issue with specifics, I'll be more than happy to. Don't come unarmed, though, because you'll lose. Here's another thing we could ponder. Before the 2010 midterm elections, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, their state legislatures had always been under Democrat control. And in the 2010 midterms, all those flipped except for Arkansas. Arkansas, since Reconstruction, has still always been a Democrat-controlled state at the state level, so they'd leave that out. What qualifies as a red or blue state? What if on the state level they're totally controlled by Democrats? Here's another item to consider. North Dakota, which does get a lot of agricultural subsidies, I'll get to that in a minute. For the longest time, their two U.S. senators were Democrats, Dorgan and Conrad, and their lone representative to Washington in the House was Pomeroy. On the state level, the GOP dominates the state legislature. But all their nationally elected representatives, their two senators and their one representative for the longest time were Democrats. Now that's going to change after the 2012 election. North Dakota will have two Republican senators and their lone representative will be a Republican. So do they qualify as a blue or red state? Granted, they're certainly more friendly to Republicans, but you have to factor that in. What if your state senators vote against something? What if your U.S. senators vote against something that would give your state subsidies? What if one party, what if, say, Democrats control the Senate, and they vote in something like Medicaid's another thing that straps the states with a lot of liabilities. There are some Republicans who'd want to reform it, but that causes a lot of problems. Maybe your state benefits from it. Benefits, if you want to call sucking subsidies from other states a benefit. Maybe your U.S. senators voted against that, so they have to take that into account too. West Virginia is a state. He would probably consider that as GOP territory. However, for the last 20 years, West Virginia's state legislature has been controlled by Democrats. Their U.S. senators have both been Democrats for eons. The last time a Democrat got 50% of the vote there for president was Clinton in 1996. The last 3 presidential elections, the GOP nominee won that state easily. West Virginia has also had more than its fair share of Democrat governors. So is West Virginia a red or a blue state, according to him? He doesn't go into that. He doesn't get into details because he's copying off of Google, a Google search or Wikipedia, one or the other. Here's another one. Now, Kentucky, I would definitely say, is a Republican state, but here's something to consider. Starting in 1990, the GOP has not controlled both chambers of the Kentucky legislature. Democrats did enjoy that on a few occasions since 1990. In recent years, however, it's been split with Democrats controlling the House and the GOP controlling the state Senate. What about governor? When Ernie Fletcher won the gubernatorial race in Kentucky back in November 2003, he was the first Republican elected to that office since Louis Nunn was elected in 1967. Both of Kentucky's U.S. Senate seats have been in GOP hands for some time. Again, I have to stress there are a lot of factors at work here. GOP presidential nominees have done well in Kentucky recently. They easily won there in the last 3 elections. Clinton won it twice, but never hit the 50% threshold. Carter was the last Democrat to do that in 1976. Maine's another one. Maine, by that map I'm going to put up, I think it was that's where he was parroting from, some talking points memo nonsense. Maine is designated as a red state because it has 2 very progressive Republican senators. They never take that into account either. Since 1990 and up until the 2010 midterm elections, the GOP has never had control of the state legislature in Maine. On a few occasions, the Democrats either had full control or it was split. Before current GOP Governor Paul LePage, the last Republican to win a gubernatorial election in Maine was McKernan, who secured his second term in November 1990. To see the last GOP governor of Maine before that, you have to go all the way back to the 60s. As I mentioned, Maine has 2 very progressive Republican senators, and they've had them for some time. Most Democrats, going by that, might say Maine is a red state, but it's not even close. No Republican presidential nominee has gotten 50% of the vote there since 1988. And the last 3 presidential elections in that state, the Democrat nominee won rather easily. I should also mention in recent history, Maine's two U.S. representatives have been Democrats. They don't mention that. They don't put that in the map either. They just count senators. So there's a lot of stuff they're leaving out. Colorado is another one. Colorado has 2 Democrat senators. But over the last 15, 20 years, the majority of Colorado's congressional delegation in the House has been Republican, so they don't factor that in. They leave that out on purpose to dupe stupid people like goldenshellback. I already mentioned the part about states benefiting. Maybe their senators would vote against it, and then the federal government forces a program on them. Education used to be the biggest item in a state budget. Now it's Medicaid. There's an example. Here's another item to consider that they included it, but a lot of people may not catch it. Transfer payments courtesy of Social Security and Medicare. 2 of the parasite red states in that map he parroted are Arizona and Florida. I concede Arizona and Florida are dominated by Republicans. Even the Democrat tsunami in 2006 and 2008 could not wrest control of those legislatures away from Republicans. Both Florida and Arizona have a slew of retirees living there who moved from another state. Many seniors spent their youth working in Midwestern states or the Northeast, building up that nest egg, and then spend their golden years in Texas, Florida, or Arizona. They're saying those states, especially Florida and Arizona, are parasites because they have nice weather. I don't know, thousands of people saying, I can't wait until I can retire and move to Delaware. No offense to my friends in Delaware. It's not as if Florida and Arizona can opt out of these senior citizens who moved there after retirement because they're tired of freezing their butts off in January and using the snowblower. They don't mention that, and the reason is their point becomes moot. Now let's move on to his point, and this was mainly made for agricultural subsidies, that Iowa is a red state, he mentioned Texas too, subsidized by blue, read Democrat states with massive agricultural subsidies, and that's why California is in such a pickle. Here's some data to consider. $261.9 billion in agricultural subsidies from 1995 to 2010. $167.3 billion in commodity subsidies. $39.2 billion in crop insurance subsidies, $35 billion in conservation subsidies, which the only ones that would be applicable, conservation subsidies wouldn't be. We could take that one out, but and then there's $20.5 billion in disaster subsidies. Corn is the most highly subsidized crop by far, and he mentioned ethanol. The problem is the ethanol tax credit, as I mentioned in another video, and I'll link to that as well, was started under Carter and his Democrat Congress. The 10% mandate was etched in stone in 1994 when Al Gore went to the Senate floor and broke a 50-50 deadlock, and then Clinton signed legislation putting the 10% ethanol mandate into law, so it's not just a Republican thing, old man. Corn is the most highly subsidized crop by far, more than doubling the second place crop. Wheat, cotton is a close third, followed by soybeans, another big Iowa crop, and then rice. It's obvious why Iowa is at the top concerning commodity subsidies. Heavy subsidies for corn and soybeans. On a per recipient basis, corn is also the most highly subsidized crop. Golden Smellback is alleging that a Democrat state like California is struggling because of all those payments going to farmers in GOP-dominated Iowa, and I already disproved that. And Texas. Texas is a GOP state. That I will not argue with. If one looks at it on a per capita basis, Iowa is still near the top. But the old man neglected to mention that USDA subsidies in total, 2 Democrat states, Minnesota and Illinois, rank right up there. In fact, on a per capita basis, the USDA subsidies sent to Illinois and Minnesota outrank those sent to Texas. You didn't know that, did you, old man? The old man never considered that, but then again, he is an idiot. In addition, if one looks at it on a per capita basis, North Dakota leads the pack in USDA subsidies, and who did they have? 2 senators. Are you listening, old man? They had 2 Democrat senators and Democrat representative for a long time. North Dakota leads the pack in USDA subsidies per capita. Do you understand what that means, don't you, stupid? South Dakota would be second, Nebraska third, followed by Iowa, and then Kansas. If we took those $261.9 billion in subsidies over the period 1995 to 2010, that's a 16-year period, dummy. That works out to roughly $16.36 billion a year. If he thinks taxpayers in California personally footed the bill for that, or only blue states, he's smoking crack. California did well in the subsidy game as well, receiving $9.652 billion in subsidies in the same time frame. Subtract that from the $16.36 billion total, and it's now $6.708 billion, which ironically is less than half of California's current budget shortfall. His contention leads us to a larger, more broad issue. Washington exists only to redistribute income, to launder it, to confiscate it, and dole it out to favored constituencies. I would argue that Congress's enumerated powers don't allow such payments. Do we subsidize homeowners insurance? Well, actually we do. Sorry, that in some cases that's a bad idea. Do we subsidize automakers to ensure the productions of cars continue? Sorry, bad example there too, old man. Does it surprise you that the top 10% recipients of agricultural commodity subsidies received 76% of all commodity payments? That's crony capitalism on steroids, but what else would you expect from a top-down program hatched in the minds of vote buyers in Washington? We can see what Washington does with fuel excise taxes. They divert a lot of that to urban mass transit. But my point here, old man, is that every time you grow government in Washington, you should not be shocked at this inefficiency. He's actually undermining his own big government philosophies in favor of unconstitutional nationalized health care, unconstitutional nationalized education, but when it comes to agricultural subsidies, suddenly he's concerned about some farmer or a guy pretending to be a farmer. That's another item I linked to in there. There's a lot of people living in large cities like Chicago, where the phony doctor's from, and New York City and Los Angeles getting commodity subsidy payments for some reason. He's for nationalized health care and education, but by golly, when it comes to agricultural subsidies, that's bad. Of all commodity subsidy recipients from 1995 to 2010, those receiving $16 million or more, that's $1 million or more per year, old man. 2 of them were from California. In the top 100, 13 were from California. I guess some people in California aren't suffering because of taxpayer subsidized agricultural commodity payments. So who's to blame for this? The usual suspects, the numbskulls in Washington. I'm also including links to House and Senate votes on the 2002 and 2008 farm bills, which just continue this. The 2002 farm bill was especially bad because it basically, if you're breathing, you qualify for food stamps. And most Democrats voted for both of those items. So, old man, if you're saying Republicans tend to spend too much money and dole out funds of crony capitalism in the form of agricultural subsidies, I'll agree with you, but it's not just a Republican problem. He also tried, Mitt Romney's gonna continue these ethanol payments to Iowa. Iowa's gonna continue to suck off the taxpayer tea. Mitt Romney's gonna make it worse. Problem is, old man, Biden voted for both of those farm bills, and Ron Paul voted against both of them. And Hussein Obama wasn't even in the Senate in 2002, although I'm sure Weedham Freak probably thinks he was. And he was too busy pretending to be qualified for the presidency in 2008. However, Hussein is a big supporter of ethanol. There's a piece of legislation, again I have the link to that, which did not become law. It passed the Senate, and then in the conference report with the House it was amended, but that mandate was still in there. But this piece of legislation that ended up not becoming law, it contained a renewable fuel mandate, increasing that mandate to 36 billion gallons by 2022. Biden and Obama both voted in favor of that. So to say Hussein is not a big ethanol supporter, and to say Democrats aren't supportive of ethanol and they aren't enabling this crony capitalism related to agricultural commodity payments, to absolve Democrats of any blame in that, you're an idiot. And you have no idea what you're talking about. We're just getting started here. Moving on to, I'm going to go over the Department of Agriculture. Let's see how their spending has increased over the years. Continuing my intellectual abuse of goldenshellback1, if you go to OMB Historicals, Table 4.1, you will see the outlays for the Department of Agriculture have increased. This is nominal dollars, from $6.437 billion in fiscal year 1962 to $45.858 billion in fiscal year 1990 to $139.396 billion in fiscal year 2011. The increase from 1990 to 2011 was more than double the rate of inflation. No surprise there. Farm income stabilization payments, Table 3.2, have been wildly erratic. Here's one example. From fiscal year 1985 through 87, it averaged over $26 billion a year. From 1990 to 1992, it only averaged $11.7 billion, only to skyrocket again, averaging $25.4 billion in fiscal years 1999 through 2001. Those 3 years were collectively more than the previous 6 fiscal years. In conclusion, this is typical of federal government largesse. Not only is a federal Department of Agriculture unconstitutional, but it's ineffective. A perfect example of crony capitalism. GSB1, goldenshellback1 has failed to make his case. And I've also got links, several links to items where exposing rampant fraud and abuse and waste of money at the USDA, but that shouldn't shock anybody. If it shocks you, then I'm shocked. And our last piece of business pertains to Golden Smellback's assertion that Hussein Obama, ridiculous assertion that a president can send U.S. troops to a foreign country via executive order. You ought to run that by your friend, the pretend doctor, see what she thinks of that. Using your reasoning, does that mean Bush could have sent troops to Iraq and Afghanistan just by an executive order? Where in the Constitution are you getting this? This is another example of the failures of our public school system. This clown was not taught how to think, he was taught what to think. No, a president cannot send troops anywhere to Libya or anywhere else via executive order. Now, in this day and age, Congress can reconvene rather quickly in the event it needs to. You know, back when this, in 1791, that wasn't possible. Now, it's in 24 hours, they could all be there. Let's say, for example, we have Venezuelan warships off our eastern seaboard. Well, the president, if Congress is out of session, the president could respond to that immediately, and then I'm sure as soon as Congress convened, they would rubber stamp a declaration of war. But if we're going to send our troops into a foreign country, whether it be Libya or Vietnam or Korea or Iraq, Afghanistan, or anyone else, that requires approval from Congress. And he also seems to think he's a transnationalist. He has a globalist mindset. If you think that NATO or the UN can give us permission. Now, they can go ahead and try to give us permission, but unless you go through Congress, you need... what NATO and the UN says doesn't matter. If Congress does not declare war, you cannot send U.S. troops to a foreign country. So that's another ridiculous facet of his argument. And his comments about someone named Cockhore, I don't know who he was talking to there. I don't know if he's confused and losing his bearings, but I went ahead and recorded those comments anyway, so I don't know who he's talking about there. I'm not sure he does. I think he's trying to segue off the subject, but that's another ridiculous assertion. That's a globalist transnational mindset. Harold Coe would agree with that. The UN and NATO do not have any authority over U.S. troops, nor can they send them to war off to a foreign country anywhere. That was probably the stupidest argument I've heard anyone ever make. Have a nice day, and don't thank me now for correcting you, stupid.